I invite you to take a seat now because we go straight to the panel. And I have saved lots of questions. You are also free to ask questions. I have this. Also, all the people watching from the comfort of your home or office or wherever you are, feel free to join us. I'd like to invite back Pim Holfve. Please join us on stage once again. Pim, in the middle, yes. And Cornelia Geppert, and you're a special guest. You're a special guest. So I should...
Check. I don't hear that well.
Oh, me neither. So.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I have Martin Sahlin coming back.
Half deaf, so.
Martin, please. And I have Per Hedelund. Wow, what a big, happy family. And I hope I have Linnea on the video stream. Yes, hello Linnea, welcome back. Wow,
Hi, good
that's so cool. Let me give Cornelia a proper introduction because you're a new face at this event. So you're the creator of a game called Sea of Solitude, which has been celebrated as an indie hit, and for its beauty and also for taking on some difficult themes. What's the elevator pitch for Sea of Solitude? Or did I just make the elevator pitch maybe?
Oh God, I hope you guys hear me. So I already forgot, it's so long ago.
Oh wow.
But in Sea of Solitude is about a young woman named Kay, who suffers from such strong loneliness that her inner feelings, the darkness, anger, feeling of worthlessness, hopelessness, turns to the outside and she becomes the monster. So in the game you have to figure out why this happened to her and how to turn her back into a human being. Mm. So I could go on forever, but this is then not an elevator pitch anymore, right? So
right. But it's intriguing. It makes me think of Franz Kafka's novel Metamorphosis.
Oh my God! Thank you. That is a high praise. So.
Wow. It's always nice to drop high literature on
yes,
games.
But yeah.
And the player is the monster. That's also an unusual concept.
Yes.
Turning the tables maybe on the.
Yeah. So you play as a monstrous version, but we like ripped the main character apart in different emotions, and they manifest as monsters as well, and you have to approach them and interact with them and talk to them and change them in order to become whole again, to become human and embrace yourself. Like that.
Powerful. All right. Thank you and welcome again. So let's just take stock of what kinds of games we have here. So Sea of Solitude is a narrative-driven or story-driven game, a single player. And it's the player trying to complete the game, so it's sometimes called player versus world.
Right.
And then we have the Chaos Wastes, and that is a 4-player co-op.
Yes.
So teaming up together, also trying to beat the game and make it to the finish line, let's say. Yeah. Player versus world. And then we have with Hunter Call of the Wild, that's open world.
Yep, open world, simulation-like or believable world, which actually has a living, breathing ecosystem. So everything you do, affects the world, including the weather will affect animal behaviors and whatever you can see and happen. So.
And would you say that players cooperate or compete or both?
No, it's you can play multiplayer and you can affect the others experiences by interacting in or affecting the world. But it's really like real hunting. Well, of course you can team up and do driven hunts because the animals will react like in the real world, that they will move around. But it's more of a solo or a joint solo experience, I would say. Mm.
So again, it's the player versus the world. If we simplify this, maybe in academic
the player
terms.
with the world.
Yes. Okay. Good. And then Martin, we have Unravel, and I would say the game mechanic is very classic. It's like a side-scrolling platformer, puzzle platformer. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it is, and also it's interesting because it is a strictly single-player game. But what we noticed is that it's a game that people play together anyway because it's simply just kind of nice to sit next to the one playing. And so it was like it's something that people played with like their kids or with their partners or with their parents or whatever, and it was quite fun to make an unintentional co-op game.
The unintentional co-op. And how does that work then? Do they pass the controller to one another, or one is sitting beside?
A lot of communication, a lot of talking, and also that's one of the design principles that I was very adamant about. That this. It has to sound nice, even if you're not playing. And I think this is something that most games forget because they use audio simply for information. That like you have feedback, you have all the blinks and the booms and whatever, which usually results in an extremely actually uncomfortable soundscape. Like it's not nice to listen to most games, and that's something we said from the start. That like even if you're the person who's not engaged with this at all, it has to be pleasant, and that makes people more curious and more interested because like they hear that it's sounding nice and they're like, what's this? What's going on? I want to see this. So.
That's great. That's one of the questions I had wanted to ask you about the thinking behind the audio, because sometimes. And I'll come back to this stock taking in a second, but sometimes if somebody's playing a game in the other room, it can be noisy and sometimes irritating, and I think we've all had that experience. But yeah, Unravel is quite the opposite. Okay, and Linnea, I'm saving you for last for a reason, Per. Linnea, budget cuts is also, I would say, a player versus world. You have to navigate through the map and you have to complete the game and such, and it's a single player virtual reality player versus world experience. Would you agree to that?
Definitely. I think you summed it up very nicely.
I was nervous, to be honest. But and what would you say about? I mean, so Cornelia's game is really narrative driven. How important is narrative for budget cuts? Do you see it as a backstory or more of a core driver?
Well, I think for us, the idiom of being player driven really takes on a whole new level and a whole new meaning in virtual reality, because it's very difficult in virtual reality for you to play another character because you are yourself standing in this space, and it gives you this sense of self in a deeper way than you have if you're in a flat screen. I think you can abstract and connect to something else a little bit easier there, like you're projecting into that world anyways, so you can also project onto this character. But in virtual reality, it's very difficult. It's fascinating when it happens to embody another character, but you also get a lot of cognitive dissonance there. So really trying to create a story that could happen to anyone and yet is somewhat fantastical or otherworldly or engaging is a bit of a design challenge, but I think lent itself to a really fun narrative for budget cuts.
All right, great, thanks. Okay, and coming to you last, Per. So my point is that your game is the only game that is player versus players competing with other players. Sure, you have a solo mode.
Yeah.
How different is that? What is the different sauce that goes into a game where players compete against one another?
Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, it's been mostly about building the social aspect of it, and I mentioned it during my presentation. This thing where it's driven by the players competing against one another. That's sort of the key part of it, of making it viral. And I don't know if that actually answered your question, though.
That's fine. I'll follow up, because when we talk about competing with other players, one might think of like esports or like Counter-Strike fights or aggressive things like that. But your player versus player is very non-aggressive. It's a very friendly and inviting kind of
I guess
competition.
it's up to you.
Does it get ugly sometimes?
I don't know. we don't really read what people write to each other. So no, but I mean, there is the casual aspect of it, but then you also have the top list. You have the monthly and special quizzes where you compete against your sort of language version, basically. You can play it from outside Sweden and still play the Swedish version, so I won't say Sweden, but and in that sense it's a little bit more competitive, and it's as competitive as you want to make it. We have the lifetime, like all-time top list, which I showcased in the last image, and a lot of our people, or our most hardcore people, do want to be on that top list, so they grind and they play, and it might be a bit, since we have a sort of like ELO rating system built into it, there is a chance that these players won't want to play against much weaker players, because there's just a big risk that they will lose a lot of points instead of, and there's a little to gain
it's like
from it.
The chess ranking.
Exactly, modified version of that.
And I think this idea of competing or trying to make it to the top of the list, that's something that anybody can relate to. But quiz is also something that anybody can relate to. If you have no relation to games, everybody has a relationship to quiz. So you've taken some of the most accessible aspects of games and put them into one. Is that the secret of the success?
Yeah, I mean, the accessibility for sure, definitely. Relatability, accessibility. I mentioned like the examples of people actually taking part in playing this. And back when it was biggest, I mean, everyone was playing it. I would see it everywhere, everyone playing on the subway, on trams. It was pretty cool. But yeah, definitely. There are few other, I mean, Wordfeud is a sort of similar case, at least in Scandinavia, in the level of accessibility. Approachability.
That's a really nice part of mobile games as well. You can spot people playing your games in different places. Even in Parliament, I've seen people play. Candy Crush.
I mean, we had a case of someone in the European Parliament, from Germany, bragging that he was in the top 10 in the German, which sort of makes you wonder how he spent his days.
Maybe that's a way to reach more voters. Who knows? Okay, Martin, you spoke about. You came from a rather dark place when you started making Unravel. You spoke about the pains of previous projects and kind of gave the impression that Unravel made you whole. When Cornelia talks about mental health in games, I see kind of a connection to your story. What part would you say does mental health play in making a game, and can it be the release for the players, like in Cornelia's game?
I think a lot of the effects that game can have are sort of secondary things, because players find outlets for things that they need. Like I remember when I was younger and before I got into games or like working with games at all, I was a mailman. I was really bored by it. And what made my days work was that I had an hour when I got back home where I could just isolate and play Jedi Knight 2 for an hour and just shoot Force lightning at stormtroopers for a while. And that's like, without that hour, I was not functional. And so it was not a game that was about mental health in any way, and didn't have any kind of underlying message, but it just had that kind of feedback that I needed at the time. So I think it's a lot about the level of immersion that you get so into it that just games can have this very powerful impact regardless of whether they intended it or not. And I just wanted to add to what we were saying before about competition. I think obviously QuizDuell is very competitive, but the way I see it is like it's kind of like the actual activity feels constructive rather than destructive, which means that people can put up with a higher level of competition than they otherwise would have, because it doesn't feel like I get destroyed. It more feels like I've learned something.
Yeah, hopefully.
So I think that's kind of cool. Where
Thank you.
Great, and I love that you comment on one another. I have some themes, but please comment on one another. Pim.
No, but I think I actually started thinking about when did I play Quiz Campen or QuizDuell, and it is one of my comfort games because it's for me it's highly competitive. I don't play it just for the sake of it. I'm playing it to win. It also makes me feel really smart when I do. And that it can give me a really good boost. And I think that's like these kind of comfort go-to games can fill these purposes. And I think I have Candy Crush is very dear to me because it's like I was semi-involved at some point, but it really blocks out everything else because it's so simple. So that's my kind of Zen game, just doing the switchers and. So I think for mental playing it serves a purpose, but I think also the mental health while making the game is a different aspect, especially in the creative process, because it's supposed to be something positive. Because we're, as I said before, we're not doing this because we have to. It's because we've chosen and we love the medium and kind of that we're creating stuff. And that's where like when crunch comes in and ruins the world or the vision, especially when we're bringing young people into the industry and we destroy them by forcing them to crunch. I think that's kind of horrible because that's like it should be a positive experience playing the game but also making it, because that will shine through. I think that's what we're seeing in Unravel. So.
Absolutely, and I think, as I was saying in my talk, it is difficult to not go too far because you always want to give your absolute best. But I guess it's a very good lesson to learn to just keep something for yourself as well, just to survive.
Great. Yes, Linnea, it's great that you raised your hand because I'm coming to you because you also touched upon topics of mental health in your talk.
Yeah, I felt a lot of resonation with what you're all saying about coming from a place of maybe burnout or stress, and games as a vehicle for recovery, but also for a way to communicate those struggles to players. And for us as a studio, we are a very small indie studio, and many of us come from AAA. And many of us at our studio were burned out or like done with that work model when we joined Neat Corporation. And so we put a lot of our frustrations with that world into budget cuts. And that is what created the narrative of this corporation that's trying to be ultimate efficiency to create these robots to take over human jobs, and that everybody's treated as a number. And it's all very very dark and grim, and so you're fighting against that in budget cuts. But I would also say that, you know, if we describe games that are healing you as a development team and letting you see this brighter future in terms of what you can create, something wholesome with like Unravel, for instance, then that's definitely what we've been doing with our next game, Garden of the Sea. And we saw the same thing as you, Martin, with the positive sentiment or the 0% negative sentiment, that when you create positive games, you get positive feedback from your community, from your players, and that is so warming and healing as a developer. Very, very interesting to experience that shift.
Can I add?
I see you kind of as the authority on mental health in games because it's been such a big discussion. And I have a question on the same topic for Florian, but Cornelia, please.
Just for me, it was really interesting. 5 years, our company is now 12 years old. We are a little indie company too. And in the first 5 years, we developed free-to-play games, like commercial games, and to make money. For it, and like Space Monkey games or whatever kind of alien. In the Sea of Solitude development, we figured out like later that it was for several employees more exhausting than the actual commercial games. And we analyzed it afterwards, also for quite a while, because when Sea of Solitude, many developers came to us, or people came to us specifically because they wanted to work on Sea of Solitude. They saw that, like the GIFs and everything I posted, and they wanted to work on it. And then came this interesting part that they were, like me, most of them, so highly engaged that they wanted to contribute all the time. Like we had such a hard time to stop them from working. I don't know if you know that, like employees that sitting there and you say, go home, please. But then it's also so nice that they engage and want to contribute and do it perfectly. And this exhausted a few of our developers after when Sea of Solitude was done, and we never had that with the free-to-play games. We never, in general, we didn't have crunch and stuff, but there it was more mentally healthy, it seems, because they haven't been close to the game in terms of their emotional background, their own mental health background, and do you understand? This was really interesting for us to see. If you emotionally invested too much in a game, it can exhaust you because you give your all and more. So that was really interesting, and we now need for the new game to figure out a way to not have that happen again. So, yeah.
All right. I'll come to you in a second, Linnea, because I want to ask Florian as well on mental health. We have seen a little bit of different approaches, but yours is in a way also about mental health, because madness is such a big part of it. So it's almost integrated in the gameplay. Have you discussed it along these terms at all?
I do think that co-op games like this are always they're always about a social component. It's you can probably play Vermintide 2 alone, but that's really not what it's made for. And I think this is also the experience we wanted to have as a studio, so that we sit down and we play it, and we play it together, and we bond around that, because you can only really make a product like that if you actually have the experience of what it is to play this together, to shout in joy, or to feel the frustration of losing at the last moment. All of these things, and I think especially during the pandemic, for me personally, this has become quite a big thing. I have like friends I play games with, not even for the game, just because I want this kind of space, this kind of social activity, and it's very rewarding to be behind the scenes but also develop it as a social activity. Like, nothing is in isolation. You can't test it alone. Why would you? You'd rather get like 4 people in a room, or if in home office scenarios, get them online and play it together. I think that's where these products are so powerful.
Interesting. Yeah, you have to test it like you play it.
Yeah.
Linnea.
Yes, I was really, I want to say inspired, but picked up on what both Martin and Cornelia were talking about in terms of being very passionate about their game, but also the development team having a hard time not spending a lot of time and working themselves into overwork in order to complete the vision that they saw in their hearts of what the game could be. And I wanted to offer a small story of success from Neat Corp, if I may, where our current game, Garden of the Sea, is everybody's baby project. Like, we all love this. It's our heart, it's our soul, it's our passion, and it brings so much joy to know that we are creating this game, and it's so wholesome. But we also have hit every single milestone ahead of deadline, which I've never done in game development, hit every single milestone ahead of deadline. And we haven't worked more than our total time per week, which is 6-hour work days, because we have like a flex hour system. So it is possible. I want everyone to know you can work on a passionate project with creative, passionate people, and get ahead of your deadlines and not be stressed, and still feel connected and passionate about the project. It is possible.
We had that before with the commercial games, that we always hit every milestone. This is why Sea of Solitude was so different. But it had a special case that maybe people know that I lived through the story partly while we're developing it. That was so special, and cooking things up and made things more difficult because I wrote the story while I lived through it, and then we developed it next to it. And so there were special cases. But you said the 6 hours a day, right? 6 hours a day you work?
Yes. Yes.
We want to go to the 4 days week. We heard that now from several studios, and more flexible, and of course the working from home stuff, and all these we want to do too. And I'm confident that we go back to the normal development. And now, after having for the first time such an emotional game, it was like the first time, and it was the chaos in between because of living through it while doing it. That was
Okay, Florian, this is the last comment on the mental health.
I think what's really important is that a company actually makes this explicit. Like, this needs to be part of the company culture. It needs to be formulated that we want to avoid crunch. We want to take care of ourselves as creatives, because I think there is a trap, right? That when this is never outspoken, that you kind of slip into more and more hours, slip into more and more crunch, and it might come from a good place, but it's destructive, and I think it sneaks in.
Yeah, I'm happy that we never crunched so far, still, but. Being so highly creative is still 8 hours a day working highly creative nonstop feels too much. I see the people that after 4 hours or 5 hours you're just exhausted, and you don't force people to sit there for 3 more hours just to get the 8 hours. It's nonsense. So yeah.
And I think thank you for giving all these different views on mental health, both in the workplace and in the creators and in the players and in the game. Now I want to change topic to design, and this is a design exhibition after all. And Per, you talked about design purpose in your talk, and Florian, you talked about the icons that you made, and others touched upon similar themes. And that's great. And I don't want to challenge you. I want to challenge you. Was it really that clear cut from the outset, or is this something that was kind of defined retrospectively?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's fit to this presentation for sure in certain aspects. But I mean, it's just. This was more a case of making it clear and understandable for the audience. I think these ideas were there in the background, like this, the whole idea of translating the board game into an app. That's sort of the core of it, and the way I presented it here, it sort of just makes sense, I think. And that's great for us. But I get the sense that often a game development project is kind of a process of discovery or exploration, and then only in hindsight do you see what you were actually doing. So would you say that's a fair assessment of the design process for as it often is, I think.
And can you
especially like in the mobile games world, which is a very sort of trial and error, iterative sort of. It's not. You crunch and you make a game over a certain amount of time. No, if you have an idea, you want to get it out there and test it as quickly as possible to get some sort of response on it and iterate. So that's part of it, I think.
Okay, Florian, I also used you for an example. Is that do you have the same experience? Was it the nice icons? Did you find out along the way?
Yes, it's very. I think design is always iteration, like in games particularly, and I think it has definite advantages. I do remember that, like, when we came up with 2 kinds of madness thing, I think that was the point where it clicked, kind of, for design. But of course, I also made it look nicely. And those screenshots that I chose were not the initial dioramas that we built, of course, but they kind of showcase the rules the best, I think. But I think the iterative part, design should be iterative because it allows for more voices in it. I'm really passionate about this. I feel like games should be for everyone. That means they need to be made by everyone. I don't think it should be one person going that's what we do. It's exactly what we do. Let's get everyone in line to do that. that's not what I think art direction should be.
Okay, so that brings a question for you, Martin, because when you tell the story of Unravel, it's really a personal story for you. It's almost like an auteur or a writer. It came from a lot of your personal experience. How does that relate to the teamwork? I mean, did you carry the design vision on your own, or how did you manage to make it into a team effort?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, because it was very much something that was mine, that I tried to make ours. And so there's always a little bit of tug of war going on there, where that it still has to be mine, but it can be a little bit ours. But I think for me, it's like I'm not the most technical person. So I'm when I write design, it's very much about why and what, but the how can be more open. Obviously, that can also be kind of frustrating for people, because how is pretty useful sometimes. But then that also means that like my job is not necessarily telling people exactly like how to do stuff, but it's more like about getting them fired up about why, and just like, what do I want the player to feel after this? Like, what's the purpose of this? And I have absolutely no idea how, but I can help you find out together. Like a very solid, concrete example of that is the last level of Unravel. There are these little motes that you can grab onto and just kind of fly with, which was entirely by accident, because there was at one point during the development where we had mosquitoes in a different level that you could swat away with your little yarn lasso. And then I realized that, well, if you can do that, you can actually attach your yarn to them, so you can fly with the mosquitoes. You could just like walk up to them and tie on the yarn to them, and just like do crazy stuff. And then I realized that this would actually be awesome if we just polished it a little bit and just made something out of it. So it's kind of like, yes, design is definitely exploration, experimentation, and just like seeing whatever happens when you just try things.
Cornelia, your game is also very much, I mean, you said it, you lived the story as you wrote the story, as you were making the game. How did you manage to transfer that personal experience to a team process?
So at the end, Sea of Solitude is a team process or a team effort. The basic idea, back in the days when I felt like so lonely. This is the main thing, loneliness. And we developed, like I said, free-to-play games for 5 years. I felt lonely in my company. I felt lonely in my private life. I felt exhausted, and I wanted to change something. I wanted to stop developing commercial games. I loved it. We made good money, not that good money, but good money. But I always wanted to make art games, like really expressing myself. So the different approach, like not thinking at first on the player, but just expressing what's inside me. And so I started with writing this first core idea, and it was based on my feelings, and I needed to let it out. This is always what I'm always saying. I couldn't let it in. I was exploding from all these emotions, so I wrote it down and wrote it into my art games. So, but this was just the first core of the main character, the main story. And then I showed this basic idea to my employees, to my co-workers, to my co-founder, to everyone. And it was like, I always see like a group therapy. Our development was a little bit like a group therapy, like in terms of everybody like immediately had something to say about it, about the theme. And all these little levels, or all the stories we have with the parents that get divorced, with the bullying, with the brother in school. I don't have a brother. My parents are happily married for over 40 years. This all comes from different employees. We sat together, and they told me stories, and everyone, like, oh, I want to tell you the story how I felt lonely, or my mother felt lonely. They opened up, which was totally shocking at first. Because I love talking about emotions, but like all my employees seems to be had to be in the same kind of persons, except some programmers. But most artists. So we came up step by step with the whole story in a team effort, really in a team. So it was my baby, right, but just half a baby. The other half completely came from my employees, and this is like still shocking. And we were really vulnerable, everybody, and this is, I think, why everybody is so proud on it, because you can see themselves also in it. I'm the voice. Yes, somebody has to be the voice and the face, and it's my core idea. But like I said, like so many influences from everybody, and this is why everybody was so hardcore involved, because it was their personal stories also in there, like their personal private stories. And so this is, I think, it's a once in a lifetime thing we did with Sea of Solitude. That amount of private stuff, like I think next time a little bit more abstract. But as we said, we got a worldwide success in a way we could never hope for, like to get known by famous writers and stuff. So it was worth the effort. But wow, that was a ride.
A labor of love is both love and labor, and programmers have feelings too, folks. Pim, you were educated as an artist.
Yes.
And when we think of traditional artists, that's also kind of a solitary creative process. Did your education give you the tools to take that to make it a team effort? And were those tools like the icons and design purpose that we've been talking about, or what's your experience?
I think first of all, the first thing I learned from actually going to art school was that I wasn't a great artist. That was a hard lesson, but actually what I saw was that what it was all about was about storytelling and problem solving in some way. Because I moved from like fine art into graphic design, and that's when it became clear that, okay, this is problem solving. And I think a lot of the learnings I have from my early days of my career, but also from my education, is what I'm applying in my leadership today. It's actually, it's the goal, is communicating something, and it's the way there. And because since I was a bad artist, I was dreaming about building my own Bauhaus, or like a collective, like bringing all the different art disciplines together so we could make fantastic installations, and that's pretty much what I'm doing today. We're like 500 plus developers, which means it's like we have writers, we have musicians, and we have every kind of like traditional art form. But what I didn't think about that then was the engineers or the programmers, who's also a highly creative problem solving craft as well. So that's the cool thing. I'm living my dream. Well, not my initial one, being a professional ice hockey player, but still the second one. No, but I think it is really interesting that it so much is can be applied into the creative process, especially if it's a purpose driven. And I think that's also that's the interesting thing, that you turned something super personal into something that became a collective project, because that's, I think, when there's sometimes frictions when you have creative directors or game directors that's turning it too personal, so they don't allow the teams to iterate on their vision. The grand vision is hard to iterate on, because that's usually what you sell to a publisher, or that you actually set up the team around. But the team needs to also iterate on the more granular parts, but also to see if this is something that will have any purpose. Because just to create art for art's sake, that's a fantastic thing as well, but it has also to have some kind of reach. It's not just because of the money, but actually to serve something bigger than and might be, if it's art for art's sake or for your personal sake, that's fine. But if you're involving other people and you want to affect other people and tell another story, it has to be accessible as well. But I think, super interesting to hear. And same thing with you. I know how hard it is to incorporate people when you have a vision, and it's still you have 51% of the votes, at heart at least. So, But
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it has to be a team effort, I think. It's just like bring a lot of yourself, but allow everyone else to bring stuff too, because if you don't, then it's not going to go very far. Yeah.
Good. And before I come to Linnea, let me give you a heads up. In a minute, I will open for questions. So if you have any questions for our brilliant creators here on the panel, start thinking about them. But first, I want to hear about design procedure, design purpose, and on budget cuts. And what do you think about this, the duality of the visionary and the team?
Well, for us, it was not so much of an auteur game in that there was one vision holder. It was from day one a team project of 3 people that then grew into 6 or 7 at the very, very end. And we even had sort of an unofficial rule that everybody should get the opportunity to design levels. So we made sure that we had a lot of systems that were really robust for AI, for the gameplay and the mechanics, and we had tools built. We spent a lot of time internally on tools to make sure that the level building process was very intuitive and easy, so that everybody, our artists, programmers, myself, our CEO, everybody was building levels and felt like they could contribute, and that was, I think, something that really lent itself well to getting a variety of experiences, because once we had created all these levels that were really fun, we actually, I think we kind of worked backwards. We took the levels that were made and said, okay, how do these fit into this narrative? In what order do we want them to go? Rather than designing the levels from the story in the back of our mind. And that was really an interesting process, kind of retrofitting things afterwards. And I think, yet again, you see a lot of variety in the levels, but they do sort of feel like they fit together. And I think that's because we all had this common idea of the world that we were creating, even if we didn't have the details of the story narrative worked out there. So design-wise, we were much more systems and mechanic focused, I would say, and the space to use them in kind of came as an afterthought and was more of a playground for us.
Wow. Linnea, if I may go a little bit beyond the topic of budget cuts and talk about budget cuts too, because I know you work together with a different company and you had a different way of working with the levels. Can you just explain that?
Yeah, so for Budget Cuts 2, we worked together with Fast Travel Games, which is another VR studio here in Sweden. And we actually used to share an office with them. So they would play test Budget Cuts and we would play test their game Apex Construct while it was being developed. So we knew them very, very well. And we had this sort of like camaraderie for developing and helping each other out and providing opinions anyway. So it felt very natural for them to come on board and help us with Budget Cuts 2. Luckily, when they came on board and helped working on Budget Cuts 2, we actually had all of the levels already white boxed already. The bones of the architecture of the levels were kind of built already, and it was all of the little scraps and pieces and ideas for Budget Cuts 1 that never kind of fit into this story, which is really interesting because then it ended up creating a sequel story really serendipitously. Like, yes, we had to put in a bridge between here and we had to motivate this space somewhat, but the mechanics were proven. The spaces existed in their entirety for a concept in terms of like being outdoors and there being skyscrapers and buildings that you're climbing on top of rather than purely interior spaces. So it was a lot of bits and pieces and seeds of ideas that we had prototyped and tested, but just never quite fit into the first narrative of Budget Cuts 1. And working together with them was a dream. They had played so much of Budget Cuts 1 and been there for a lot of the development that they just understood intuitively how it should feel, if that makes sense.
Wow, great. Thanks, Linnea. Okay, here's your chance, and it's not coming back, not at least in this room, on this day with these people. So, or if you're already happy with the questions. Oh, great, Martin Singdom. So I will now pass the mic to Henrik, who will do his real fast run, and pass the mic again to Martin. And Martin, of course, was our keynote speaker yesterday. Yes, Martin Singdom.
Hi. Yes. I think about the giving the team ownership thing that was talked about a little bit. And I talked to Martin about this yesterday. Do you guys think there's a difference between giving the team ownership when there's like a 7-person studio or a 10-person studio versus if you're in a AAA or AA kind of 150 people on a team setting where, like, if it happens, if you as a creative leader feel like it's starting to go in the wrong direction, it's much harder to change course and stuff like that. Like, what's the feeling on how scale matters for giving teams ownership and stuff like that?
Interesting question. Anyone?
Yep. Sure. Yeah, it's as Åsa presented yesterday. One of our kind of or the targets is goals over instructions for everything we do, and that works fantastic. It's super smooth if it's a team of 10 or less, because it's super easy to get alignment on what the goal is. As soon as you kind of, I think there was someone told me there's a power of 7. I'm trying to bend it to 10, but after 7, it's going the culture going to change and it's going to be distorted. But somewhere between 7 and 10, every time you add 7 to 10 people to a team, it's going to be increasingly difficult. So the goals will become diluted. So you need different kind of situationsanpassat ledarskap in English.
Contextual leadership.
Contextual leadership.
Yeah, you need different kind of leadership. But the thing is that we still believe in the individuals, and that everyone on a team, depending no matter where you are, they should feel that they are contributing. So that means that we need to apply the goals and instructions. But if we're looking at the product as a pyramid, which we're trying to avoid, but I can't think of anything better. If you're at the bottom of the pyramid, you still need clearer goals. And also, you also need to make sure that they have the context. So it's not free-form designing or programming, which is a fantastic art form as well, but that they actually know what the goal is. And within the goals, they have no restrictions of solving the problem. And that's kind of that's the foundation. The further up you are in the hierarchy, it's going to be easier to get the full picture. But it's also your job to make sure that vision goes down throughout the whole organization. And our smallest team right now, well, pitch team is usually like 3 to 5 people. Our biggest teams are up to 200 people. So it will vary, of course.
All right. Cornelia and then Linnea.
So just to mention, my co-founder and me, we are both like creators, highly creative, doing like everything. Like I do everything except programming, and he does everything except writing. So, and we figured out now that we are a 12 people studio, and we cannot handle more. And in terms of our personality types, we love the size. We had now the opportunity to grow much bigger, and talk with certain people. And we decided we are too strange. I don't know. We act this, we love it. It is small and we can handle it this way. We need to sit down as much as possible and create, and not just lead. I mean, and so this is what we love, and we love the restrictions that brings it to figure out how to make a high quality game with this few people, and it works. We see that everywhere, like with smaller indie teams. My 2 cents on that.
Great, thanks. Okay, Linnea.
So we have a little bit of experience with this in NeCorp, and then I also had a bit of experience as a lead at a AAA studio, so comparing the two was really interesting. And I think what we noticed is that, I mean, it sounds cliche, but it all comes down to trust and respect, right? Like if you trust and respect your fellow developers, then you give them that space and they have it and they can do what they want with it to co-develop. But it becomes difficult when, for instance, my title is creative director, right? So I could have a say about what someone else is building and override that. But and it, you know, you kind of have to stop yourself when you're saying like, oh no, but what I wanted was this. Oh no, but I think it could be like, but no. And so one of the things that we've sort of developed at Neat Corp is this culture of what I kind of am calling rebellious game development. That if somebody on the team just goes rogue and is like, nope, I'm just going to build this, and even if they don't tell you, even if they're doing it out of spite, whatever their reason is, they are energized and excited and passionate to build this thing. They know the game because we've all been talking about it, we've been sitting in it. That's my job, to make sure that we're all talking and sitting about it. And so if I know that I've done my job to inform and provide information to everybody, then if somebody goes rogue, as I call it, and just wants to create something, even if I'm like, ooh, but the schedule, or ooh, but the final vision that I initially had several months ago, and ooh, but this, you know, the thing that we agreed on several times ago, like, even if this breaks away from that, it's probably going to be pretty magical, because we trust and respect each other as creative developers. And I think that's kind of important to remember.
Great. Thanks so much, Linnea. So we're out of time. I wanted to ask about your relationship to the players, because we've talked so much about player feedback and how you observe them or what kind of ideas you project on. Have to save that topic for a different time. But I'd like to just close on maybe a positive or inspiring note. So. And we'll do a round, and if you can be concise, that's great. If you're not concise, well, you know, lunch will be served a few minutes later. But my question to you is, what is it that drives you to make games? Why do you want to make games? Why have you chosen this path? Per, do you want to start?
I think it from the beginning it was sort of a fluke. But as it is today, it's all about working with the great people that I work with and achieving things together. I'm not saying it necessarily has to be games, but I think the gaming environment sort of brings that along, that type of community, and getting people from all around the world to join you in your studio, and being like-minded in that sense, at least. Working with the great people I work with, I would say, if I get to choose one.
Beautiful. Thank you. Martin?
Spite.
Not as beautiful, but sure.
No, it's not purely spite, but it's definitely there. It's up there, you know, just like...
Show the haters?
Yes. But also, the second thing is kind of just this sense that games are super powerful and can do really awesome things. Like my favorite ever research that I read was when they realized that people who play lots of games have lots more lucid dreams, like dreams where you can control the outcomes. Don't know exactly why, but the way I choose to interpret it is that as a person who plays lots of games, you are used to problems having a solution. You are used to problem solving, and you're used to that kind of optimism in a way. And I think that's really cool that they can change how we dream. And if they can do that, they can do a lot more good things, I think. So there's definitely room to do cool things with games.
Spite and optimism. Optimism can be spiteful.
Yes.
Tim?
So now, well, he started, and I have to ask about research, if it's the chicken or the egg here. Are these people, did they have this ability before you started playing it? I'm not questioning it, I'm just intrigued. So that's the next topic for next panel, please. I make games because I love, as I said, I used to love making games, but I've become so old now, so I can't contribute anymore. It's, I think my main motivator today is the relationship between the developer and the community. The way we can take games that don't super perform at day one, and actually get the users in. And it's like, it doesn't have to be hundreds and thousands, but it can be like tens of thousands or just thousands of players. The way they can improve something, I think that's so awesome. I think this is like, I cannot think of any other industry that does it in the same way. And also, especially all the kind of testaments or reviews when we have positive things that we're actually filling gaps in people's lives. That's also, that really gives me a developer high, I would say. But yeah, and also I thought that when I started working within advertising, that was going to be like the most creative environment ever, and it's definitely not. This is so. Yep.
Love it. Thank you, Cornelia.
Yeah. So I originally had been a comic artist. So this is my origin industry, and then I went to the animation industry, and then to the games industry. And I would call it like it comes the closest to playing God. Oh God, can I say that? Forget that. No, but it's true. Like in comic, you compared like comic and animation, it's stiff. Yeah, you cannot really build a real world where you are really in and decide on every little aspect, like playing God. And in comic, it's like this a flat layer, and animation also like. But in games, when I started like really building a world, you can choose on everything and let the player interact with everything. I would say it's like this comes the closest to playing God, and that creating a whole world, whatever comes to your mind, and let the player like really find their own little stories in it. And I love that so much. So sorry, this is why. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you, Florian. What is it that drives you to make games?
So I also used to work in advertising. I also used to work as an illustrator. Play has an emotional core, always. And making games, therefore, always has an emotional core. Like, you cannot make games without some sort of emotion attached to it. I find that fascinating. I think it's so cool that humans spend so much of their lifetime with something that is an emotional activity, whatever that emotion might be. And I think that's why I want to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you. Linnea, what is it that drives you to make games?
Well, I also had a few other careers before games. I was a professional violinist, and then I was a fine artist before stumbling into games. But I believe wholeheartedly that games can save the world. That if we play more games and we make good games, we can change the world for the better. And that's why I make games.
So much, my dear panelists. Thank you for opening up and sharing your emotion, sharing your darker moments. This was a roller coaster ride for me. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it back home. Let's first give a big hand to the panel. Thanks again.